what I love about these as a format is it's not like a webinar or one of these things where it's a very formal presentation. It's just, putting the spotlight on somebody who's done some interesting stuff that's relevant to the world of, online live events, streaming, whatever you want to call it, and then centering a chat on them. And so we have Miranda Gohh today as the person in the spotlight for us, but really everybody's in the spotlight because everybody here is doing interesting things related to this. And our goal really is to have this be very much a conversation as opposed to anything other than that. And so I think we'll definitely do that. Miranda is one of the producers of Circle Jerk, which was on Stellar earlier this year and in other formats in different places. It was a finalist for the Pulitzer. It was off-Broadway and it was online. There was an incredible hybrid production earlier this year. And she's an associate producer at Davenport Theatricals. She's working on A Beautiful Noise. And I think she said those are costumes for A Beautiful Noise behind her. So that's cool.
These didn't make it into the show, so they're here.
They're surplus costumes.
Yes.
So, all right. So you could walk around and people would say, hey, are you in Beautiful Noise? Because it looks like you are, but maybe not. And then many others will hear about that a bit. And also she's the founder of Theater Producers of Color. So Miranda, thank you for taking the time to be the kind of linchpin of our conversation today. Thanks you for joining us.
Of course.
I'm Jim. I'm the founder and CEO of Stellar, co-founder and CEO of Stellar, and you guys might know me. I'll lay off my describing myself further. We'll just talk about what we're doing here. But I'd love it if everybody could just say a couple things about themselves real quick without taking too much time. Start with Louisa.
Sure. I'm Louisa. I run a website called Filmed Live Musicals, and it is a site dedicated to cataloging all the stage musicals that have been legally filmed and made available to the public. And it currently has over 170 musicals from around the world dating back to 1938 with a backlog of over 300 shows. And I send out a weekly newsletter and a bi-monthly podcast where I interview the people making the shows.
And we had a great time. I had a great time on Louisa's podcast. That was people are still making comments on LinkedIn and stuff like that about that podcast. So good podcast
awesome.
hosting, Louisa. That's awesome. And how about Sam, who I have not met?
Hello there. How are you, Jim?
I'm good.
Good. So my brother and I have been developing a musical called Rewind. It's 80s pop music, but original. And we put it up most recently at Theater Row in May, where we filmed it with a 3-camera shoot, and it's going to be streaming on Stellar. I think it's December 6th.
Awesome.
So we're, whereas we ideally want to make sure that the show gets staged, physically as often as possible, we're also open to trying to make the show available via streaming, and just wanted to know a little bit more about that.
Awesome. Louisa, is this in your database, or is Sam's show in your database?
It's not yet, but it's okay. Actually on my radar. I don't know where. I think I'm following you on Twitter, maybe. But we can chat after.
Yeah, let's.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you, Sam. And also we have Talia.
Hey, I'm Talia. I'm an independent producer and director in New York. How I got introduced to Stellar was I started in 2020 a virtual theater festival called Playdate Theater, which has transformed throughout the pandemic into our latest event that was working with Stellar. I was one of their emerging creator recipients, where we combined the idea of a virtual background on a physical stage. And so we've been developing a lot of kind of like hybrid nature projects, as well as I'm super involved in the TikTok and social media space. So figuring out what it means to be creative content, streaming and hybrid in that way as well.
Excellent. All right. Well, so I think what we'll do is we will just kick this off. I'll ask Miranda some questions about Circle Jerk, and then we'll just go from there. So if you have a comment, or like, I don't want this to be a long conversation or Q&A between me and Miranda and then question time at the end. It's not really that. Like the reason we keep these groups small, and it's never, I think 8 is our max, not counting me, is because if you go over that, it's really hard to create a sense of being able to kind of jump in or just make a comment or whatever, and it turns into more of a presentation. So certainly we can achieve that here with the group this size. Do feel free to say something that comes to mind, or sort of interject with a question or kind of crosstalk with one another. This is, I think, a really nice starting point is to talk about Circle Jerk and the production, particularly that was done this spring. So Miranda, so you opened the show. I know it had a previous life during the pandemic. I guess just let's do this. Talk about the show a little bit, and then, like, if you can, build up to this spring, the decision-making process to do a fully hybrid version of the show. Why, how, what? Like, just narrate that experience for us, I think.
Yeah, Circle Jerk is an incredible piece of theater written by Michael Breslin and Patrick Foley, who started a production company a few years ago called Fake Friends, that also includes Ariel Seibert, who's the dramaturg on the piece, and Kat Rodriguez, who was an actor in Circle Jerk. And it is essentially a hilarious critique on white gay male culture, sort of playing on Fire Island, but we're taken into the world of Gaiman Island. And it had its world premiere online in, I believe, October 2020, sort of in the thick of the pandemic, when no one was really being very active in the theater world. Circle Jerk wasn't written for the screen, but during the pandemic, they still wanted to put it up for the world. And so they produced it at Theater Me Too, and it was live streamed for, I think, 14 performances then, and then captured for archival performances following that. And I didn't know Michael and Patrick, but the show had done extremely well. It was sort of like the example of good digital theater that was smart and innovative and really playing with the form of theater through screen in a way that I don't think had been explored before that. And so I got to know them, and they had secured space at the Connolly Theater, which is this amazing off-Broadway theater on East 4th Street. That's where Kate Berlant and Bo Burnham are doing their show right now. And so they needed a producer to help them bring their vision of doing Circle Jerk in person and live stream, to help them with that. So I came on board, and what we got was this huge production of Circle Jerk live, where we had a live audience at the Connolly Theater every night, and also live streamed it on Stellar every night. It was sold out. It got really good reviews, and it was just, in my opinion, a huge feat production-wise, with like 16 different camera angles. It was 3 acts. There were really no rules. It was very like downtown theater, which was exciting for me, and I think brought in a lot of newer and younger audiences. So that is sort of the show in a nutshell.
I just want to say that everything you just said is true, and there's more, which is that the truly hybrid nature of that production back in spring is something that I think has not been. It's absolutely, in my opinion, where things are going, but very few people have replicated the level of doing online right and doing in person right. So people were having 2 different experiences. The people in the theater were having one experience that was optimized for that experience, and the people watching on the screen were having an experience that was optimized for the screen. And yet it was the same production. So I mean, it really was in some ways so hybrid. Like it was the embodiment of hybrid, in the sense that the things that you can do on screen that you can't do in person, you did, and the things that you can kind of lean into in person that you can't do on screen, you did. So I just want to say, like, having that experience, of watching it on the screen. I didn't see it in person. I was just marveling the whole time at how much thought went into making that work. So I guess congratulations on that first. But I mean, like, what did you guys have to think about in terms of that? You know?
Yeah, they really were almost two separate productions, and we worked very closely with our video designer David Bengali, who's doing amazing work on and off Broadway right now in the video world. But there were a ton of different considerations for the two iterations of the show. We likened it to almost like an SNL recording where we would see all of the action unfold at the Connolly Theater as audience members, and the different videos, different cameras moving up and down. And to Talia's point, there was also a screen at the theater that was part of the in-person experience as well. The third act is almost like all through iPhone screens, a la TikTok. So, the creators really thought very in depth about what the experience was at the theater for an in-person audience, and what the experience was like for those at home, even what, for example, like the intermission screen looked like. And we had a live actor who just sat for 15 minutes on a stool while the countdown clock went down. So
actually, that was really interesting, and I'll tell you what's so interesting about that. So, if for most of the time during the intermission, there was the actress who was, I think it was a woman, who was staring at the screen. She had a backdrop, so your screen, it was very digital, right? The feeling was very digital, even though it was a real backdrop. She's got a countdown timer, and then at some point, another camera shows us that shot that we were just seeing, which is the actor sitting in front of the backdrop with a camera. So we're kind of breaking the illusion of the digital side of it and coming back into the real world, which I thought that was fantastic. Just the intermission, I just thought that was super cool. Like, oh, okay, it wasn't a digital background; it was a real background.
Yeah, exactly.
Really cool.
So yeah, they thought very, very carefully about what each spectator's experience would be, and it was interesting to see who would tune in to the stream every night. I think we had like a few repeat attendees who saw it like 7 times in the 3 weeks that were up, and we had people from like the UK to Australia to California. So in terms of the accessibility of being able to reach those people who weren't in New York but still wanted to see the show, that was awesome.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to make sure, again, I'm reminding people that you can feel free. There's not going to be a formal like, and now you can talk moment in this conversation. Now you can talk. But yeah, I would just add again about the hybrid thing. Did any of you see the production that Eva Price did at the Bourbon Room in Hollywood of Cruel Intentions?
No.
It was fantastic because, again, there was an in-person experience and a digital experience that were different. And some of the sort of cinematography and photography choices of that were really remarkable. What you could show like over the shoulder of a character on the stage, for example. There's a book that's important to that show, right? And so there's a shot over the shoulder of a character onto the book so you could actually see what's in the book, right? If you're watching online. Of course, if you're in the in-person audience, you're seeing the character holding the book on it. You just get this whole palette of different possibilities, which is fascinating.
I have a question. How is it that people are able to sit in an audience and watch a stage performance, but at the same time, it's being filmed in a way that's interesting to someone just watching it without interrupting what people are, in other words, without disturbing the live performance? How is that done?
So we had someone manning the stream every night, but for the stream, everything was live, but programmed in such a way that, for example, let's say they're in the living room scene, and we at the Connolly are seeing the action unfold, where as the person on the stream is seeing what has been programmed via the camera. So, you'll get a camera angle from downstage right at one moment, then, the stage manager would call camera 2, camera 3. So there wasn't a lot of that was pre-programmed, so that the actual labor of capturing what was unfolding was not disturbing the live audience every night. There were a few moments where some of the characters do have a handheld camera, not a handheld, but one that they can pick up and film around the theater. So that happens in our opening shot. So that's also on the screen, but that's also what we see in person. But that's a good question. I also had that question when I was in pre-production, how that would all work.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, well, it's interesting too, because I think the idea of a character in a show carrying a camera is not weird. That there's nothing about that's weird, right? I mean, when you think about the world we live in, where people could be filming something at any time, anywhere, so it's not like that's like some strange thing. I guess it would if the show were like a historical recreation of the Battle of Waterloo or something, and Napoleon's carrying. That's actually kind of interesting. Now that I mention it, we should do that. But
Dolly Levi comes in with the camera over his shoulder.
Exactly.
And there were so many good jokes that I felt like, for me, like when I watched it in person, I was watching the screen a bit, but then I also was getting the like behind the scenes look. And there were so many bits that I think that the streamer got to see. Like in one scene, the pillow kept changing every time they cut back to a character. But we also got to watch the like stagehand underneath handing the pillow.
Right.
And so as a theatrical event, I thought it was super special because as even someone who was live in person, I got to participate in both what I thought was the live stream, though Miranda corrected us, it's even cooler than it was. But I got to watch like a live depiction as well as the physical one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really think that media consumption today is very sophisticated and meta, right? So the idea of seeing what's going on behind the scenes to make the show happen is kind of part of life, right? I don't think media consumption, it has to be like, wait a second, I saw somebody. We see theater is the ultimate suspension of disbelief medium, right? Like, like when they form I don't know, when they pretend they're on a bus or something on a Broadway stage, we know they're not on a bus, right? Like we it's not like the illusion has to be perfect. So I feel like there's actually a lot of ways to play that. And Miranda, you actually mentioned that it resembles an SNL shoot, right? I've made the comparison to late night shows, right? Late night shows where the audience is actually very much part of the show, right? Whether it's whatever show you want to say, right? If you made it seem, I guess, like this happened during the pandemic, made it seem like it was just in a quiet soundstage and it's just the host, it's just a lot less interesting than if the audience is in the what's the name of the theater, the what's late, the late show on Broadway is the Ed Sullivan, right? Like if it's a full Ed Sullivan theater, it's a whole different kind of energy that's in there. So yeah, absolutely.
I'm really curious. I have so many questions. I'm curious about revenue, like how like if obviously it was positive or maybe it wasn't, but like I'm curious about, and the cost of filming and all of that, and how industry people, like other producers, how are other producers reacting to this kind of thing? Do they think it's an anomaly? Do they think it's like that it could be the future?
I think producers are always thinking of what could be additional revenue streams. So I think the fact that there's an opportunity to expand audiences is exciting to people. I don't know if I think it really comes down to the piece and whether it makes sense to have a version on screen, and whether, you know, film as a medium enhances or offers a different experience from the stage production, right? I think we're seeing a lot more of live capture, in the sense that maybe we have 3 different cameras that are mostly just a more traditional capture, where people, for example, who are still not ready to go to the theater because of COVID, the show, and that's very much like you're just seeing maybe just one camera shot of a show, whereas Circle Jerk was sort of took it up a few notches, and recreated or created a wholly new experience, that really played with the medium of film in other ways that I don't think other productions are. So I think it personally, like, I think it depends on the piece, and how film might complement or enhance the work itself. But I do think that there is an appetite for to access theater from outside of the physical space, right? The fact that, you know, when Circle Jerk premiered during the pandemic in October 2020, we had a number of viewers who were encountering fake friends work for the first time, and a lot of those people were New York based, given their fan base of theater people, but a lot of people were tuning in from LA or San Francisco or the UK. So I think that sort of light bulb moment of producers seeing, oh, you know, there's a way for us to bring this experience to people outside of New York is really exciting. In terms of revenue, it was interesting because that was my first production I've done that was hybrid in this way. So it was great that we were able to, reach people through Stellar and have that revenue stream, but also have, sold out audiences at the Connolly Theater, to have that stream as well. It was very important to fake friends that tickets be accessible. And so with Stellar, I believe we did a sliding scale where we had different price points for people to choose from. I think it was like $5, $10, $20, maybe $50 really, pay what you can. And it was surprising because people did buy the $50 tickets. They didn't have to, but they were able to, so they did. And similarly at the Connolly Theater, it's very much a more downtown off-Broadway theater, that was probably younger than most traditional theater going audiences. So we did have lower price points to acknowledge the fact that, there might be a lot of people in college who aren't actively working but wanted to see the show. So that was important to us to be able to reach them.
I'm curious how one of the things I remember Circle Jerk during the pandemic, and I was like, oh my goodness, so exciting. I'm home. What an amazing piece of art right now. Since the world has opened back up in a way, have the streaming thoughts of producers as like a revenue stream changed? And have you been noticing that conversation, or Jim also with with how Stellar is doing?
Yeah, I think go ahead, Miranda. I have obviously.
No, you go ahead. You go first.
Well, the reason I said for you to go ahead is this may be a minute, so bear with me.
Not to stir any pots.
What's up?
I said not to stir any pots.
This is a great question, and the answer is, I would say that the industry is in distress at the moment. I don't think there's any question that theater as an industry is in a crisis of a business crisis and an audience crisis. So to be honest about that, in these conversations, like sales are absolutely diabolical right now. It's the way, let's just take Broadway as an example. You can't have a Broadway industry for a long time at the sales we're doing that are being done today. That doesn't work permanently. And I think the challenge, the mental challenge for people in theater right now, and it's not just Broadway, but it's the one where we have the most data. The mental challenge for people in theater right now is getting over the idea of audiences coming back. I think there was a feeling, and I certainly had this feeling, that there would be a kind of the bell rings and audiences come back to the theater after the pandemic. I think the pandemic just went on too long with the Delta and the Omicron wave having the impact they had on the live world, that, instead of this idea of coming back, I think this is the audience. The current level is the audience, and the challenge for producers and everybody in the industry is to build tomorrow's audience on top of the base that we have today. And so I think it's very difficult for people to take on all the challenges at once of just getting back on the stage, dealing with very, very low sales, dealing with the new production challenges around COVID, right? COVID itself, still on Broadway, there's daily testing for the performers, which is probably a little too much at this point, right? So there's all these, in terms of cost and effort and all this, people have different opinions on that, but it's a lot. It's a burden that wasn't there before. And so I think there are a lot of people who are waiting to see what the future holds. But I think there are other people, and we see that every day. We've seen, we saw after 2020, we saw a lot of people who went into the digital space retreat from it as they were like, okay, we're back and it's going to be great. It wasn't great. And so we're seeing a kind of vanguard of thinkers build their digital presence a bit at a time. So we've seen absolutely an increase in the number of people who are in it for good, right? They're in digital for good. They're committed from an artistic point of view, from a marketing point of view, to figuring it out. And there's every reason to think that two things. One, that the digital side of it in time can be absolutely represent unlocking 2 or 3 key new revenue streams for live performance, and 2, maybe the thing that's absolutely necessary to ensure the survival of at least commercial theater as we know in the US. So I think it's this, when you're in the middle of the wheels of history, when the wheels of history are turning and you're there, it feels like it's taking forever, but looked at differently, it's early. It's early in the process of this. So, and I talk to people every day in theater, in music, in multiple genres on this. And I would say right now there are probably 10 to 15% of people taking, whether they're doing it yet or not, they're taking very seriously the idea that they need to figure out and begin to make their digital capabilities real. And then a lot of people who are just, and I can't really blame them, they're just on their heels in every way, in terms of figuring out what tomorrow is going to bring in the live business. So that's my take on it, Miranda. Yours may differ from mine, but that's how I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think in terms of audiences returning, we just have to acknowledge that we live in a different world than we did pre-pandemic. We spent a year and a half more or less locked down in all ways, from, the minute we wake up, we walk to our offices or just open our laptops, and that is like the start of the workday, and then we close our laptop and then walk over to the dinner table and maybe then watch TV at night. And that a lot of people grew comfortable with changing their lifestyle habits in that way. So it's been interesting to see, which performances are best sold on Broadway, for example, or, what people seem to be gravitating towards. I think on Broadway specifically, like, a lot of people don't have a full work week at the office. A lot of people are now working from home on Fridays. And so the new Friday is actually Thursday, and people want earlier curtain time so they can, hop on the train back to New Jersey. So I think we've been slow to observe those changes and adapt. And with digital, I think right now, to Jim's point, we're sort of in a just keeping our heads above the water moment where we're like, let's just survive. And there hasn't been, unfortunately, a ton of room for thinking beyond our scope of what theater is. But I think that we just have to start thinking outside the box in terms of reaching people where they are. And even if those people are in New York, maybe they want to watch it from home. So I'm in agreement with what you're seeing and feeling, Jim.
That's helpful. Thank you, guys.
I just want to have a sort of a comment about on the experiential side. There's nothing like sitting in a live theater, a live performance, people experiencing the same thing. Maybe that's an old-fashioned point of view, but one of the things I came out of the music business way back, and one of the things as a performer I realized was that I had to pour a lot more energy, say, into a recording of my voice to make it pop coming back just sound-wise, just listening to it, as opposed to performing, let's say, in front of a crowd. It seems to me that to capture the kind of energy that people receive in a live theater, with live performers, and getting that sort of same willingness to suspend disbelief and being pulled in via a stream, it's really, really challenging. The two-dimensional aspect of it, I think, makes it a very challenging proposition. And so what might have to happen, I think Miranda really put her finger on it. She said some material lends itself to working that way, and then there's some material that probably wouldn't work that way as easily. That's my instinct, anyway.
Actually, you make a good point there, Sam, because I think this is one of the arguments in favor of hybrid as opposed to just recorded, right? And we talk to people about this all the time, where their inclination is to, and this is not necessarily, this is also good, but recording something and like editing it to within an inch of its life and then making it a movie. I think when you add in the live dimension of it, like Circle Jerk did, it's easier to feel as though you're part of it, even if you record it, right? Just if it's not done again in the cold, studio space, as opposed to in a place where the performance is actually happening in front of people, all the better if it's live and you're sharing the experience with other people online. But that's why I'm such a big advocate of hybrid. It's just, you don't have to make an either or kind of choice. And if you know how to design, for the screen, and you know how to design that experience, you can have two different but good experiences that are live.
And to speak to your point, Jim, about that feeling that it doesn't, like the 2D experience is not the same as the 3D experience. There's research from the UK, I think it's Nesta. They tracked the National Theatre live broadcasts, and the cinema audiences, and there's data to support this for at-home audiences too, feel like they are part of the in-person capture just by watching it on screen. So like it can be just as much an in-person experience, even though you're not in person in the theater. And that's for like delayed broadcasts. That's and like Jim has talked about a lot previously, like the having like the chat function in live streams where the fans can interact. Like there's still very much a feeling of being a part of it. And like, yes, being in the room is different to watching it on a screen, but like it's still a very people still feel it's a valid way of watching theater and still get just as much enjoyment out of it as they would if they were in person.
It's actually interesting because in some way, like, the example, I think I even have this example in the book, the example of, and this definitely happened with Circle Jerk too, but the example that I remember most strongly, and I wrote about it in the book, is the Jagged Live concert, which had 20,000 people watching it at one time. But more to the point, people joined the chat. They joined the stream about an hour before it started because they had pre-roll content. And there were thousands of people chatting with each other before the show, which is one thing. But the show ended and the chat went on. Hundreds of people were in the chat for 2 hours after the show ended. And they were, yeah, I mean, it was remarkable, right? Like, and I remember, Miranda, I remember there were some really incredible chats that happened during Circle Jerk as well. Like there it was really cool. Just the ones that I saw. The chat that happened after Jagged Live, though, it went on and on and on, and people were like getting to know each other in that chat, and talking about the songs they loved. And then by a half hour after the show was over, they were talking about stuff unrelated to the show. That one of them proposed made a marriage proposal to our CTO Will, who was it was weird, but it was cool. And the thing that I took away from that is like, okay, that's not the same as being in person with other people in a room. But on the other hand, if we're honest about it, if we're sitting in a room with 1,000 other people watching a theater show, do you really interact with them in that very much? Not really, right? Like, so it's different, and you know what I mean? There's a different plus minus there, but there's some interesting new possibilities that come up in terms of live interactions with real human beings that you kind of don't really get, in person. You get other things from in person too. I don't think anyone is suggesting in person is not its own very special thing, right? There's not an either or. I think it's really the thing. Will did not accept the marriage proposal, by the way. What else? What's on people's minds? I know Luisa's got. I'm just looking at Luisa's face. I know she's got some thoughts that I want to hear.
I feel like as an audience member and as someone who like just loves theater, like pre-pandemic, I mean, I worked on Broadway. I was like, I would see hundreds of shows a year, and now like I've had previous health problems that mean I'm scared to go to the theater now, and I feel like there's a part of me that feels angry. That's like, I feel like I'm being left behind, and like it's that world is now closed off to me. And I know like for many people who are immune compromised, who have disabilities, who like literally going to the theater and being around 1,000 unmasked people is a death sentence. Like it's just like, it's that simple. And it's really frustrating when there's this technology available, when we like, it proves that like there's so much for it and it's not happening. And I'm like, who do I talk to make it happen?
I'm doing everything I can, Luisa. Everything
I know.
every day.
I'm preaching to the choir.
I occasionally feel that, and I'll see you and raise you on that. People who, for health reasons, can't go. People who, for financial reasons, can't go. There's a lot of talk in theater about access, and now that the greatest access tool that's ever been conceived of is available, people are doing not very much with it, right? So I see this all the time, right? Like people who've spent a lot of years yapping about access, who also don't really have much to say about digital. And my reaction is like, oh, you weren't serious. Okay. Now I know you weren't serious, right? Like right. You just it was a nice thing to say. But then you go beyond that to, you don't have to be reticent from a health point of view or from a finance point of view to not be in the place where the thing is happening. Almost the whole world is not in the place where the thing is happening, right? And yet there's, how many times when there's a theater event that's not where you happen to be, would you like to be there? I think this happens for people all the time. And that's another form of exclusion where it's just too bad, right? At least that's how I feel about it. Talia, you're the youngest one here. What do you think is going to happen with this over the years?
Well, it's a little bit different, but I do find it interesting. Universal just gave a whole bunch of TikTokers basically this platform to develop a show with NBC. And in my mind, that was kind of a crazy combination of taking one platform and bringing it to another. And I think something that stands out to me so much about Stellar and Stellar's kind of concept around digital streaming is that it doesn't try to force anything live into a box that it's not, but to really create an event that is all of its own. And personally, I kind of think that's instead of having this either or, it's the and mentality of figuring out how we actually can create this third experience for that in order to happen. Because I think so much of what's happening is we're not rolling with the punches that are like the landscape hasn't even grown yet, if you will, for digital theater. Like it's just starting. And so often we're trying to take it and put it into the boxes that we know and that we're familiar with.
Yep.
But because we haven't even begun, we're just beginning that investigation. It's hard, I think, for the community to wrap its head around.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. I'm, like I said, I'm pretty old school. So it's probably hardest for me of all of us to get my head around some of these ideas. But it seems to me that if this is going to be something that has legs for the future, it almost has to be something that some creative group of people are going to have to almost invent a new form. Something, Jim, you called it a hybrid experience, but something that isn't just about capturing something and then putting it up on a screen. Something that is its own thing, that shines in this media, and that doesn't dull in this media. So could be great.
The question that I always have is, what do we call it? Like, what is this thing that's not quite theater and it's not quite film? It's something in between. And because I think, like, it's actually not new. Filming theater and making it available to people, we've been doing it since we invented cameras. The first thing we started filming was vaudeville. That was like what the early filmmakers captured, was people on stage. Like, they did it like not on stage with an audience because they didn't have that technology then, but like we've been doing it since the beginning. And there's a almost a century now of making this thing. And I think because we don't have a name for it, we don't know what to call it. Like, is it just what PBS does? Is it just great performance? But it's so much more than that. And like the pandemic has exploded it. Like there is so much content available now, like for musicals specifically. Pre-pandemic, 1 or 2 a year, like maybe if you were lucky. I think 2017 was like 3 in 1 year. It was so exciting. And now there's like 25 a week. And I think but it's all like, to me, it feels like it's very, it's not the mainstream. It's like independent theater. It's school theater. It's amateur groups. And I wish there was what do we call it to make it like a legitimate thing?
If you solve that, I will. If you come up with something good, Louisa, I will be the leading proponent of it. Because I agree with you. This is I'll try not to make too much of a digression here, but you guys have all heard of a cake pop, like you get it at the bakery, a cake pop. So the inventor of the cake pop went through a bunch of cycles on what is this thing called, because cake on a stick is not that great, right? Cake pop, you're like, oh, I know what that is. It's a lollipop, but it's cake, right? So the name really was the sort of breakthrough moment for the cake pop inventor. It was like, yeah, this is a cake pop. I could put cake on a stick. Does anybody want cake on a stick? Maybe not. So please, if you come up with something, if any of you come up with something, I think you're absolutely right to say that it would really help. It would really help.
Branding. It's all about branding.
Yeah. And also a name that captures what it is, that captures what's unique about it and tells you what it is, right? Absolutely. I would just add one thing to your comment, Sam, which is that sports cracked this code. And I point to broadcast sports as an example of this. If you go back to the 60s, though, so Sam, only you and I were alive in the 60s, and I was only alive for a few months in the 60s. But sports was not done well on broadcast. It was, what do you know, a couple of cameras pointed at the field, and very dry. Johnson's got 16 yards on today, and real dry like that. In fact, as Wilt Chamberlain is one of the greatest basketball players who ever lived. He's the only player who's ever scored 100 points in a game which is a lot. It was in 1963 or 4, and there's no video of it. There's no video of that game. They had video cameras in 1964, as you know, but it was something that the what you think of as standard sports broadcasting, even if you're not a sports fan, you know what this is like, right? You know, this sort of like they build drama, they highlight players in their personal lives, and they zoom in on this part of the field, whatever it is. That was invented in the late 60s and 70s by ABC Sports. It was very much, there were a handful of people who were like, you know what, we need to turn this into an experience that you can't have at home, but it's the same thing. You know, it's sports like it is a sports event, but what can we do to leverage the idea of broadcasting this? And they gradually invented something that we very much take for granted now. If I were to say, you know, there's no replacement for being in a stadium to watch a football game, it would be a ridiculous thing for me to say, because that's true, but there certainly isn't any barrier to people watching a lot of sports, right? And
it's interesting what you just said, because it's exactly the opposite for me with watching sports. I would rather watch it on TV, where they've got a terrific production of the thing, and I'm seeing all kinds of things I would never see if I was there live. So they really did crack the code on that one.
Transpose, yeah, right. But that wasn't done overnight, right? There was a process of getting better at that. Talia, were you going to say something, or were you just waving?
I was saying, there you go. That's our key.
That's it.
It's funny. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say it's similar with Hamilton. I remember that when they were recording it, they were super nervous that it actually would deter people from coming, but it just boosted their numbers. So.
That one, boy, I tell you, I wish I could kill that thing forever. That has just been disproven so many different ways that people, you know, I always feel like people just say that as a reflex, and if they really stopped and thought about it, they'd go, I don't think that, you know. But boy, that is an old chestnut that needs to die.
And what's funny about sport, like the same arguments for putting sport on TV are the same arguments we're hearing for theater, and it's the same arguments that people had when records came about, and it's the same arguments that people had when radio came about and TV. Like it's so funny to see, like, going back to like Variety from the 1920s and people being like horrified about film and then horrified about talkies. And it's like the people won't ever come to the theater, and like the all the guilds and all the unions and all the leagues were like, no, we can't, we're taking away work from our actors and our industry if we allow this to happen. And like we're just behind the 8 ball. I feel like it's like we've done this, we've rehashed it, let's get ahead of this.
Actually, I can take you one generation before that. The first industry to freak out about a new medium that I saw was the sheet music industry. At the beginning of the 20th century, records were now, you'd have to go to a gramophone parlor and you'd pay a nickel or whatever, I don't know, and listen to a record. And the sheet music industry was like, this is going to kill the sheet music industry, because if people can go to a gramophone parlor and listen to a song, why will they buy sheet music and play it at home? This has happened a few times.
There's always resistance when something new is coming along. Always. And
you know, I'm very, you know, I've come to become a very sort of stoic about this, in the sense that people are going to get there when they get there. You know, our job, those of us who are in this field and innovating in this area, is to do good work and help people who are ready to do good work, and not, you know, wag my finger, I'm pointing directly at myself, at people who aren't ready, because you won't get them ready. What'll get them ready is great examples of good work and successful models and stuff like that. So that's what I'm talking to myself here, you realize, not you guys, about not wagging fingers. But really, it is, we are at the beginning of something, and it always feels like it should go faster, you know. But Talia has a nice patient perspective on it, so that's good, and we should all share that. So, Miranda, what else is up with you? What do you want to tell us about that you're doing before we wrap up here? Like, what's coming up that we need to know about?
Everything's happening. As you can see from the costumes, we're in previews for A Beautiful Noise, the Neil Diamond musical. I'm also a co-producer on K-pop on Broadway, which are two very polar opposite experiences, and I've learned a lot as a producer on both of them. They're both a lot of fun. So if you have time to see a show this holiday season, one of those are a good bet. I'm also in rehearsals for a new musical called Joy, based off the life of Joy Mangano, who was this single mom who invented the Miracle Mop. That's going to George Street Playhouse in December. And then what else? My organization, Theater Producers of Color, is ramping up for year 3. It's an educational program for emerging BIPOC producers, sort of acknowledging the lack of producers of color on Broadway. So it's crunch time. Everything's happening.
Excellent. What else is anyone else? Other projects that you guys want to tell us about? Well, as long as we're here, we want to hear what everybody's got coming up that they're excited about. Anybody?
I'm about to, next week will be my 50th episode of the podcast.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And I'm excited about it. It was an interview with Alex, I'm forgetting his last name. He is the founder of the Pro English Theater in the Ukraine, and they have been streaming work from Kiev, like literally as bombs fall around them. They've been creating and streaming work. Like really lovely, amazing human being, and really excited about like what he's creating.
Awesome. Actually, love to. I'm going to listen to that podcast. I might need you to introduce me to him. We might need to become a sponsor of their work.
You got it.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Talia, what's up with you? What you got? Anything do you want to share?
Sure. I am waiting by the hour to find out if I'm one of the finalists to be a video producer for Sundance this year. So to like go to their festival. And so if I get that, I will be going and working for Sundance. Awesome. And if I don't get that, I'll be assistant directing my first feature film. So all good things. I just would like to now know which one I'm going to do.
I can understand that. And Sam.
Yeah, really, these days are about changing gears. For the last 12 years, I was saying my brother and I have been developing a musical, and we're at a point now where really it's about the business side of this thing rather than the creative side of this thing. And we're trying to develop our muscles around outreach and making friends in the industry. So that's where we are.
Cool. Awesome. So you guys, just so you know, we're doing another one of these on December 8th with Scarlett Kim, who is the director of innovation, I think is her title, at Oregon Shakespeare Festival. So she is super cool, really smart, doing all kinds of interesting stuff. So join us for that. And thanks, everybody. This is a great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. Miranda, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice meeting everybody.
Everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.